Okay, and we're live. And we are live. Welcome to Love and Money Secrets TV. I'm Dame Lillian Walker, your host, and today we are diving deep into Chapter 5, Part 2 of Breaking the Habit of Being Yourself. So let's get started. So we left off here on page, for those of you who are following in your own books, we are actually right now on page 114 at figure 5b. So when the frontal lobe is working in creative mode, it looks out over the landscape of the entire brain and gathers all of the brain's information to create a new mind. If compassion is the new state of being that you want to create, then once you ask yourself what it would be like to be compassionate, the frontal lobe would naturally combine different neural networks together in new ways to create a new model or vision. Okay, so we're going to read that again, and I want you to really think about what was just revealed to you, because this is powerful information. And as you know from the previous chapters, and also if you've been following along since we did the study of becoming supernatural, you know now that the brain holds a tremendous amount of electromagnetic power. And then the heart has thousands of times more electromagnetic power than even the brain does. But it is with the brain that we control our thoughts, of course. So what it said right here, we're going to read that again. If compassion is the new state of being that you want to create, then once you ask yourself what it would be like to be compassionate, the frontal lobe would naturally combine different neural networks together in new ways to create a new model or vision. So you can substitute the word compassionate for more loving, more prosperous, more abundant, whatever it is that you want, you can substitute that. And you can tell your brain, what would it be like to be more loving, to be more abundant, to be more prosperous, to be more charismatic, to be more funny, to be more joyous? You get the picture. So it might take stored information from books you read, DVDs you saw, personal experiences, and so forth to make the brain work in new ways. Once the new mind is in place, you see a picture, hologram, or vision of what compassion means to you. So making thought more real than anything else. So I want to just stop right here because there is so much just in this little paragraph that we just read. This is basically telling you that you can program your body, you can program your brain to a new mind. So for example, I'm just going to pick something out of the sky. If let's say you've had the habit of being hot-tempered, just to pick, let's say that you're a hothead and you traditionally have not been good about mastering the emotion of anger and you tend to blow up. Imagine, what would it be like to be patient? Or if, let's say you are chronically late, what would it be like to always be on time? Or better yet, what would it be like to always be early? So you can use this model for anything that it is that you want. And in fact, I was just listening to a book that was written at the turn of the century in 1908. And in the book, it was talking about some of these same principles, because as you know, success leaves clues, and true success principles transcend time. It doesn't matter whether it was 5 years ago, 500 years ago, 5,000 years ago, the principles stand the test of time. And in that particular book, they were talking about how you can magnetize things with your thoughts and how you use your imagination to visualize and to cement into the imaginative visionary faculty, and how you start to magnetize and bring things into your 3D experience as you're imprinting what it is that you want, then you start having inspired thoughts to take action in the direction of those things that you have as a goal or as a dream. And it also, this book, further along in the book, deeper into the book, it did talk about some of the principles that you find in the Talmud, the Zohar, I don't know if they mentioned the Zohar actually, but Zohar, as you know, is one of the sacred texts. I think it's like 22 volumes. I actually own the entire set of the Zohar myself. Of course, I haven't read it all because each one is like, they're big volumes. But what it was talking about was how you can use the brain to magnetize and to bring things into reality, and how you fix on whatever it is that you want. It could be anything, whether it's a business venture, whether it's, bringing in money, whether it's bringing in new business opportunities, whether it's your divine love, and so on and so forth. So it's congruent with what these teachings that Dr. Joe, of course, Dr. Joe has compiled everything from the scientific realm as well as the mystical and the ancient teachings from multiple different disciplines. And so anyhow, I thought it was just fascinating how it just really dovetails really well with this information. Okay, so moving on here. Making thought more real than anything else. So during the creative process, the frontal lobe's third vital role is to make thought more real than anything else. So stay tuned for the how-to in part 3. So when we're in a creative state, the frontal lobe becomes highly activated and lowers the volume on the circuits in the rest of the brain so that little else is being processed but a single-minded thought. So since the frontal lobe is the executive that mediates the rest of the brain, it can monitor all of the geography. So it lowers the volume on the sensory centers responsible for feeling the body, motor centers responsible for moving the body, and association centers where our identity exists, and the circuits that process time in order to quiet them all down. So with very little neural activity, we could say that there is no mind to process sensory input. Now remember that mind is the brain in action. Remember that the mind is brain in action. So no mind to activate movement within the environment, and no mind to associate activities with time. Then we have no body. We have become no thing. We are no time, and we are in that moment pure consciousness. So with the noise shut off in those areas of the brain, the state of creativity is one in which there is no ego or self as we have known it. So when you are in creation mode, the frontal lobe is in control. It becomes so engaged that your thoughts become your reality and your experience, of course. So whatever you're thinking about in those moments is all there is for the frontal lobe to process. So as it lowers the volume from other areas of the brain, it shuts out distractions. The inner world of thought becomes as real as the world of reality. Your thoughts are captured neurologically and branded into your brain's architecture as an experience. So if you effectively execute the creative process, this experience produces an emotion. And as you know, and you begin to feel like that event is actually happening to you in the present. So you are one with the thoughts now and feelings associated with your desired reality. Pretty cool, huh? So you are now in a new state of being. You could say that in that moment, you are now rewriting the subconscious programs by reconditioning the body to a new mind. So that is how, my friends and gems, that is how we reprogram, how we rewrite whatever has been in our subconscious mind so that we can create a new reality and therefore a new personality in essence. Okay, figure 5C. When the thought that you are attending to becomes the experience, the frontal lobe quiets down the rest of the brain so that nothing else is being processed but that single-minded thought. So you become still, you no longer feel your body, you no longer perceive time and space, and you forget about yourself. So you lose your mind, you liberate your energy. So in the act of creation, when we become that nobody or no thing in no time, we no longer create our customary chemical signature because we are not the same identity. We don't think and feel in the same way. So those neural networks, our survival thinking had wired, are all turned off now. And the personality that was addicted to continually signaling the body to produce stress hormones is now gone. So in short, the emotional self that lived in survival mode is no longer functioning. And the moment that happens, our former identity, the state of being, bound by survival-based thinking and feeling, is no more. So since we are no longer being the same being, emotional energy that had been bound to the body is now free to move throughout your body. So where does that energy go that once fed that emotional self and that emotional state? It has to go somewhere. So it moves to a new place. That energy in the form of emotion moves up the body from the hormonal centers to the heart area, on its way to your fifth energy center, your throat, and then to your brain. Because remember, when we're in fight or flight, our first, our second, and our third energy centers, remember, first energy center is at the base of your spine, your perineum, where your privates are, to your second energy center, which is just 2 inches below your belly button, below your navel, and 2 inches above your third energy center is just 2 inches above your navel. So the energy is locked below your heart. So the energy, if you're always in stress, you're always in fight or flight, your energy never makes it up to the heart, which is why your heart is closed, which is why you're not heart-centered, which is why your brain is not optimized and why you're not really thinking clearly, because you're always, basically you're in a post-traumatic stress state where you're always reliving the events of the past. Your body is pulling up those emotions from the past, and your brain is recalling all those memories from the past in anticipation of wanting to keep things familiar and anticipating what is going to happen. It only knows what it's always known in the past. So it can't create anything new in the future because it's a scratched record at that point. But no more, because now, with this information that we just reviewed, you're able to liberate that energy from the first 3 energy centers. And now that energy is going to go to your heart, and it's going to make your heart open up. And now you're going to feel not only an open heart, but unconditional love. And now you're able to take that energy and broadcast that out. That energy is going to continue to move up to your 5th energy center, your 6th, 7th, and 8th energy center. And that's when you go mystical. And not only that, but that's also where you start to signal your autonomic nervous system through the use of your brain. And you start to heal and optimize your body for better health, for better abundance, better prosperity, better emotional states, better love relationships, better everything. Okay, so we fall in love with our creation because you're the one who's creating this. You're the one who, you've got your hands on the steering wheel, if you will, of your boat, your ship, your car. Okay, so we fall in love with our creation. That's when we experience our natural state of being. Once we stop energizing that emotional self powered by the stress response, we have moved from being selfish to selfless. So with that old energy transmuted into a higher frequency emotion, the body is now liberated from its emotional bondage. We are lifted above the horizon to behold a whole new landscape, no longer perceiving reality through the lenses of those past survival emotions, we see new possibilities now. And we are now quantum observers. Don't you love that? Quantum observers. Maybe I'll start a Facebook page called Quantum Observers. Doesn't that sound cool? Of a new density. Okay, so we are now quantum observers of a new destiny, and that release heals the body and frees the mind. So let's revisit the chart of energy and frequencies from the survival emotions to the elevated emotions. See figure 5A. And when anger or shame or lust are released from the body, they will be transmuted into joy, love, or gratitude. Okay, we're going to hit the pause button right here because it's basically just in the last several paragraphs that we have read and reviewed. If you pay close attention, you're being given the formula on how to alchemize, how to be the alchemist of your life. You're basically fundamentally being told the secrets of the universe, how to transmute the energy that you currently have, which is an anxious, nervous, fight or flight stress response, and liberate that energy that has been stuck. I mean, maybe you have gut problems. Maybe you have, I mean, we talked about and we've read about as well, all the different manifestations that those fight or flight responses do and can create. And then we've read case studies also of different people who had these different conditions and they were able to overcome themselves and able to apply these principles and then liberate the energy and liberate themselves. They are no longer held hostage to being in that stressful fight or flight response. They liberated that energy. It opened up their hearts. They felt unconditional love, which has been inside of them this whole time. And they freed themselves and gave themselves the gift of a new mind and a new body. And then everything changed. Okay. So let's revisit the chart of energy and frequencies from the survival emotions to the elevated emotions. See figure 5A. And when anger or shame or lust are released from the body, they will be transmuted into joy, love, or gratitude. I don't know about you guys, but that sounds like a pretty nice upgrade when you're able to take anger, shame, or lust and upgrade and basically trade that in for joy, love, or gratitude. Because I don't know about you, but I feel much better when I'm in a state of joy, of love, and gratitude, as opposed to being in a lower vibrational state like anger, shame. Gosh, it's got to be a horrible state of being to be in shame, and also to be in lust, because it seems like to me, lust has an inherent sense of lack that's inherent to it. So that's got to be when you're like super lustful, that you must be really like pining and really just in a, you know, in a place of not having, which is probably why you're so lusty. And as we know from the last chapter, it talked about how your body is in a much denser state of being. So your body actually feels heavy when you're in shame and lust, shame, anger, or lust. Okay, moving on here. So on this journey to broadcasting higher energy, the body, which we conditioned to be the mind, becomes less of the mind and becomes more coherent energy. The matter that makes up the body expresses a higher vibratory rate, and we feel more connected to something greater. In short, we are demonstrating more of our divine nature. So take note of that. You're going back home to more of your divine nature. So newsflash, the true you really is divine. And so now you can go back to your more divine nature, which you will automatically be in an elevated state of emotion and vibrational frequency. Imagine, what could you do with that? So when you're living in survival, you're trying to control or force an outcome. That's what the ego does. When you're living in the elevated emotion of creation, you feel so lifted that you would never try to analyze how or when a chosen destiny will arrive. Because you're already in that state of divine love, and you're like, you already know that it's coming, and you're in the present, you're already so joyous that it doesn't matter when that outcome pops into your existence, because right now you're already in that place of joy, of love, and of gratitude and appreciation. So you trust that it will happen because you know that you know, just as you know that inside that, like, I know that I'm a girl. No one has to convince me or give me DNA proof. I know that. You'll have that state of knowingness. So you trust that it will happen because you have already experienced it in the mind and in the body, and the thought and the feeling. So you know that it will because you feel connected now. Now that the energy is flowing, you feel connected to something greater. So you are in a state of gratitude because you feel like it's already happened. And you may not know all of the specifics of your desired outcome, when it will take place, where, and under what circumstances, but you trust in a future that you can't see or otherwise perceive with your five senses. So to you, it has already occurred in no space, no time, no place, from which all things material spring forth. So you are in a state of knowingness. You can relax into the present and no longer live in survival. To anticipate or analyze when, where, or how the event will occur would only cause you to return to your old identity, which now in contrast isn't attractive at all, because you know that's what 99% of the people do. And that's why 99% of the people get the unwanted, because they're dwelling and paying attention to the unwanted rather than creating in quantum and knowing that it's done. And then you're already in appreciation and gratitude because you know that you put the order in. It's like you downloaded the program into your computer. You know the program is there. You know that it works. Now you just have to hit play. Anytime you want to access it, it's there. Same thing. So you are in such joy that it's impossible to try to figure it out. That's only what human beings do when they are living in limited states of survival. So as you linger in this creative state where you are no longer your identity, the nerve cells that once fired together to form that old self are no longer wiring together. So that's when the old personality is being biologically dismantled. So those feelings connected to that identity, which conditioned the body to the same mind, are no longer signaling the same genes in the same ways. And the more you overcome your ego, well, the more the physical evidence of the old personality is changed. So the old you is gone. So now if you look at figure 5D, survival mode versus creation mode, and it shows you the two states of the mind and body. So you'll have to look that up in your book. By completing part 1 of this book, you have intentionally acquired a knowledge base that will help you create your new self. Now let's build on that base. We've covered a lot of possibilities. The concept that your subjective mind can affect your objective world, your potential to change your brain and body by becoming greater than your environment, your body, and time. And the prospect that you can move out of the reactive, stressful mode of living in survival as though only the outer world is real and enter into the inner world of the creator. It is my hope that you can now view these possibilities as possible realities. Now, if you can, then I invite you to continue on to part 2, where you will gain specific information about the role of your brain and the meditative process that will prepare you to create real and lasting change in your life. Part 2, your brain and meditation. Okay, so we're going to go ahead and we're going to go into chapter 6. We just finished first half hour here, the balance of chapter 5, and we're going to go ahead to chapter 6. 3 brains, thinking to doing to being. So it's often useful to compare one's brain to a computer. And it's true that yours already has all of the hardware you'll need to change yourself and your life. But do you know how best to use that hardware to install new software? I want you to picture 2 computers with identical software. In fact, picture 2 computers with identical hardware and software, one in the hands of a tech novice and the other being used by an experienced computer operator. So the beginner knows little about the kinds of things a computer can do, let alone how to do them. So the intention behind part 2, simply put, is to provide pertinent information about the brain so that when you, as its operator, begin to use the meditative process to change your life, you will know what needs to happen in your brain and in your meditations and why. Change entails new ways of thinking, doing, and being. So if you know how to drive a car, then you already experience probably the most elementary example of thinking, doing, and being. So at first, you had to think about every action you took and about all the rules of the road. Later, you became fairly proficient at driving, and as long as you paid attention, conscious attention to what you were doing, eventually you were being a driver. Your conscious mind slid over and became a passenger. And ever since, your subconscious mind has probably occupied the driver's seat most of the time. Driving has become automatic and second nature to you. Much of what you learn is via this progression from thinking to doing to being, and 3 areas of the brain facilitate this mode of learning. Okay, I want to pause here for a second, because for most of you, what you don't realize is that this is going to be whatever it is that you're trying to change, whether you're trying to heal, whether you have a disease, an illness, some sort of traumatic accident that happened to your body and you're trying to heal your body from that trauma, whether it's an emotional, psychological, relational type of situation, financial type of situation. This is going to be the second time that you're changing your personality, because you were born knowing all of this from birth until about 6 or 7 years of age, because that's about the amount of time you're in theta throughout that whole time. And your parents get a hold of you and they start conditioning you to their ways of thinking, and they start to, alter your personality, if you will. And it's not with any kind of bad intention, because they do it from a loving place, but they don't, that's how things have always been done. So you altered your personality to conform to whatever the societal norms were from your parents, your teachers, whatever your neighborhood, whatever the society at large, whatever you saw on television, and so on and so forth. So this is going to be your second time that you're undergoing this transformation, but now you're in the driver's seat, you're consciously aware, and you're making the choices. You're not having some exterior outside force make those choices for you. You're going to choose to bring yourself back to your true self and to be in a loving state, and then get rid of the fight or flight response that's stuck. It's kind of like having your car stuck in 3rd gear. You actually have 8 gears, but you've been stuck just in the first 3, and you can't get beyond the first 3. You never get into the 4th, 5th, 6th, 7th gear because you're in that fight or flight response. Okay, so moving on here. But did you know that you can also go directly from thinking to being? And it's likely that you've already experienced this in your life. Through the meditation that is at the heart of this book, this chapter will give you a prelude. You can go from thinking about the ideal self you want to become straight to being that new self. That is the key to quantum creating. Change all begins with thinking. We can immediately form new neurological connections and circuits that reflect our new thoughts. And nothing gets the brain more excited than when it's learning, assimilating knowledge and experiences. These are aphrodisiacs for the brain. It fondles every signal it receives from our five senses. Every second, it processes billions of bits of data. It analyzes, examines, identifies, extrapolates, classifies, and files information, which it can retrieve for us on an as-needed basis. Truly, the human brain is this planet's ultimate supercomputer. And as you'll recall, the basis for understanding how you can actually change your mind is the concept of hardwiring, how neurons engage in long-term habitual relationships. I've talked about the Hebbian learning, which states nerve cells that fire together, wire together. Neuroscientists used to think that after childhood, brain structure was relatively immutable. But new findings reveal that many aspects of the brain and nervous system can change structurally and functionally, including learning, memory, and recovery from brain damage throughout adulthood. So, but the opposite is also true. Nerve cells that no longer fire together, no longer wire together. So if you don't use it, you lose it. Okay, I'm going to stop right here because this is a compelling argument for keeping your brain active, for continuing throughout your entire lifetime to want to learn and to engage in new information and experience new things. Because again, if you don't use it, you lose it. It's a very, I want to say, primitive concept, if you will, because it's just like a muscle. Your brain is like a muscle, even though your brain is not made of muscle. But you've heard of muscle memory, right? So if you don't actively use the different aspects of your brain, remember Kandel was the research scientist who discovered that when you do things that are habitual, you use 1,300 neurological pathways of the brain. But when you are exposed to new information, when you're reading, learning, and applying new information, now you have 2,600 neurological pathways of the brain that are firing and wiring its synapses. Your IQ actually goes up during the time of exposure of new information. And as you learn, as you repeat, as you apply, and you start to basically assimilate that information, it makes you smarter, and you're lighting up your brain. You're lighting up your brain twice as much, because instead of 1,300 neurological pathways of the brain, you actually have double 2,600 neurological pathways of the brain. So there really is no reason for you to ever retire your brain. At any point in time, you should always be striving to learn and to expand your mind and to expose your mind to new and different things and acquire knowledge and keep your mental faculties from going down the rabbit hole of dementia, senility, and Alzheimer's, because all you have to do is keep it fine-tuned through exposure of new information. It's kind of exciting if you think about it. And you have control. Only you have control over that. Nobody else can make you read and learn or do any of it. That's up to you. So you can even focus conscious thought to disconnect or unwire unwanted connections. So thus, it is possible to let go of some of the stuff you've been holding on to that colors the way you think, act, and feel. The rewired brain will no longer fire according to the circuitry of the past. Another pause here. So what this is telling you is if you have had a tendency in the past to hold on to resentment, if you've held on to grudges, if you feel that you can't forgive people in your past for whatever reason, the reasons don't matter. The bottom line is that you're still locked into the addiction of drinking that poison. Because believe you me, whether you want to acknowledge it, whether you want to believe it or not, unforgiveness is a poison that you drink yourself expecting it to harm somebody else. Forgiveness is not really for the other person. It's for you to release and to let go. Doesn't mean that what they did was okay. All forgiveness means is that I'm going to let this go, and I'm not going to be held prisoner to that set of circumstances with that individual. And you're moving on. And whatever things, whatever lessons you learned from that experience, you now can look at it from an objective point of view and say, oh, this is why that happened. And now you have wisdom that you can store for future reference, and you don't have to repeat that lesson over and over and over again because you got it and you let go of it. So it's not continuously traumatizing you. As long as you hold unforgiveness, and make no mistakes, the energy of unforgiveness will settle in your body, most commonly in the form of arthritis. It is a very common side effect of people who have a lot of unforgiveness in their life. You'll oftentimes notice that they have a great amount of arthritis. It tends to be one of the manifestations of unforgiveness. Also liver is also, people who have anger management issues oftentimes have liver problems. Anyhow, let's move on here. So thus it is possible to let go of some of the stuff you've been holding on to that colors the way you think, act, and feel, and the rewired brain will no longer fire according to the circuitry of the past. So the gift of neuroplasticity, the brain's ability to rewire and create new circuits at any age as a result of the input from the environment and our conscious intentions, is that we can create a new level of mind. That is such good news. There's a sort of neurological out with the old, in with the new, a process that neuroscientists call pruning and sprouting. Neural pruning, neural sprouting. It's what I call unlearning and learning, and it creates the opportunity for us to rise above our current limitations and to be greater than our conditioning or circumstances. So in creating a new habit of being ourselves, we are essentially taking conscious control over what had become an unconscious process of being. Instead of the mind working toward one goal, I'm not going to be an angry person, for example, and the body working toward another, let's stay angry and keep bathing in those familiar chemicals. We want to unify the mind's intent with the body's responses. So to do this, we must create a new way of thinking, doing, and being. So instead of the mind working towards one goal, I'm not going to be an angry person, and the body working toward another, let's stay angry and keep bathing in those familiar chemicals. We want to unify the mind's intent with the body's responses. So to do this, we must create a new way of thinking, doing, and being. Okay, so I want to go back here because without a shadow of a doubt, make no mistakes. For example, it says here, I'm not going to be an angry person. Okay, your brain, the way the brain is actually put together with the 8 neurosomatic systems of the body, it doesn't work for you to say, if you're trying to rewire and recondition your brain to a new way of being, and what you're trying to do is to get rid of yourself being self-identified as an angry person, you can't say, okay, I'm not going to be an angry person. I'm not going to be an angry person, because your brain doesn't hear, I'm not going to. It only hears going to be an angry person. It doesn't hear don't. Anything that negates, the brain doesn't hear. It only hears the action verb and then the action itself, which in this case is anger, which is a state of being. So instead, you have to language it as I'm going to be a happy person. And then your brain registers going to be a happy person, be a happy person, be a happy person. So I am a happy person. I would encourage you to, rather than say I am going to, instead embody I am a happy person. I am, the most powerful words we've been told in ancient scriptures from all over the world is I am. It's the two most powerful words that you could ever utter out of your mouth or for you to think in thought. I am, because whatever it is that follows, I am, you are. So if I am happy, there you are. If you say I am sad, there you are. So it's your choice, though. No one can choose that for you. Only you can. So, okay, so to do this, we must create a new way of thinking, doing, and being. So given that to change our lives, we first have to change our thoughts and feelings and do something, change our actions or behaviors to have a new experience, which in turn produces a new feeling. And then we must memorize the feeling until we move into a state of being, when mind and body are one. At least we've got a few things going for us. Along with the brain being neuroplastic, we could say that we have more than one brain to work with. In effect, we have three of them. Okay, so I want to stop here again, because if you were following with us in Becoming Supernatural, if you haven't read Becoming Supernatural, you can check the playlist on my YouTube channel, Becoming Supernatural. All 14 chapters, as well as the afterword, are up, and you can read, review, and apply the principles of that book. But one of the things that you should be aware of, he talks about in his books about you have your first brain, which is the obvious organ inside your head. Then you have the heart brain, which the heart, if you look at an embryo and then a fetus, as an embryo, the heart nerves and the heartbeat in a fetus is developed well before the embryo's brain. So I think that's fascinating. And the heart is really what's controlling that embryo until the brain forms. And then now you have the second brain. And then, of course, the third brain that Dr. Joe talks about is the brain that's in your gut. It's actually in your stomach. And that's why we talk about having that gut feeling. That's, the seat of your intuition, if you will. And people talk about that gut feeling. And in many cultures, they consider your gut, your stomach, your solar plexus as being the first brain. So here he's talking about those three brains, 1, 2, and 3. Or actually, I guess 1, 2, or 3, the way our society has prioritized it, it's 1, 2, and 3. However, if you continue to study with Dr. Joe, one of the things that he reveals to you is that in actuality, each one of your energy centers has its own brain. So there is a certain intelligence that you'll find at your first energy center from that energy center's brain, and your second energy center, and your third energy center, fourth energy center, your fifth energy center, sixth energy, seventh, and your eighth energy center. And there's valuable information, which is why he is such a big proponent of you doing the blessing of the energy centers, also known as the Bowtech meditations. Bowtech meditations, there's Bowtech 1, 2, 3. I think it goes all the way up to, I think we're up to 8 now, but I don't believe 7 and 8 are available on his website. I think you only have 1 through 6 that are available on his site. But the blessing of the energy centers, that is the benefit of doing that particular meditation, because it releases the information. It not only connects all 8 energy centers, but it gets the brain of each energy center communicating from the first one. All of that information goes up to now your second energy center. So you have the information from the first and the second connected. And then it goes to the third. So now you have 3 levels of energy and brains connected, then to the fourth, to the fifth, to the sixth, the seventh, and then to the eighth. And of course, incredible things happen as you learn not only to connect those, but then there are certain times where you want to connect with a particular energy center as you're conducting your life on a day-to-day basis. There are times where you're going to want to tune in and tap into the energy center in your fifth energy center, as opposed to your fourth energy center, as opposed to your sixth or seventh energy center. You know, if you're trying to, for example, if you're going to, let's say you're getting ready to go to bed and that evening you would like to have a very lucid dream, and you would like to tap into either some sort of astral projection or astral journeying throughout, you know, the cosmos, you may want to speak and tune in and tap into your eighth energy center as you're right before you actually drift away into sleep, because as you speak to that eighth energy center, that will help facilitate that. And anyhow, so those are some of the benefits from actually tuning in to those energy centers and the corresponding brains to each one of those. So for our purposes, this chapter will limit its focus. Kind of tongue-tied here. Okay, so for our purposes, this chapter will limit its focus to the functions of the three brains that relate specifically to breaking the habit of being ourselves. On a personal note, I find that studying what the brain and the other components of the nervous system do for us is an endlessly fascinating exploration. I would say ditto to that. My first book, Evolve Your Brain, covered this topic in more detail than would serve our purposes here. There are additional sources for study on my website, www.drjoedispenza.com. And of course, many other excellent publications and websites are available for those who want to learn more about the brain, the mind, and the body. And I will confess, I have never read Evolve Your Brain, but eventually we'll read this here on Love and Money Secrets TV, and we will review that information if you guys would like. I definitely think it would be a fascinating study. So figure 6A, the first brain, the neocortex or thinking brain in white. The second brain is the limbic or the emotional brain, responsible for creating, maintaining, and organizing chemicals in the body, which is in gray. And the third brain is the cerebellum, which is the seat of the subconscious mind. That's in charcoal. From thinking to doing, the neocortex processes knowledge, then prompts us to live what we learned. So our thinking brain is the neocortex, the brain's walnut-like outer covering. Humanity's newest, most advanced neurological hardware, the neocortex, is the seat of the conscious mind, our identity, and other higher brain functions. So the frontal lobe, discussed in earlier chapters, is one of 4 parts of the neocortex. Essentially, the neocortex is the brain's architect or designer. It allows you to learn, remember, reason, analyze, plan, create, speculate on possibilities, invent, and communicate. So since this area is where you log sensory data, such as what you see in here, the neocortex plugs you into external reality. So the neocortex plugs you into external reality. So in general, the neocortex processes knowledge and experience. So first you gather knowledge in the form of facts or semantic information, philosophical or theoretical concepts, or ideas that you learn intellectually, prompting the neocortex to add new synaptic connections and circuits. Second, once you decide to personalize or apply knowledge you have acquired to demonstrate what you learned, you will invariably create a new experience. This causes patterns of neurons called neural networks to form in the neocortex. These networks reinforce the circuitry of what you learned intellectually. If the neocortex had a motto, it might be, knowledge is for the mind. Simply put, knowledge is the precursor to experience. Your neocortex is responsible for processing ideas that you have not yet experienced, which exist as a potential for you to embrace at some future time. As you entertain new thoughts, you begin to think about modifying your behavior so that you can do something differently when the opportunity presents itself in order to have a new outcome. As you then alter your routine, actions, and typical behaviors, something different from the norm should happen, which will produce a new event for you to experience. So, from new events to new emotions, the limbic brain produces chemicals to help us remember experiences. So, the limbic brain, also known as the mammalian brain, located under the neocortex, is the most highly developed and specialized area of the brain in mammals, other than humans, dolphins, and higher primates. Just think of the limbic brain as the chemical brain or the emotional brain. When you're in the midst of that new experience and your senses send a rush of corresponding information from your external world to your neocortex, its neural networks organize themselves to reflect that event. Thus, experience enriches the brain even further than new knowledge. The moment those networks of neurons fire with a pattern specific to that new experience, the emotional brain manufactures and releases chemicals in the form of peptides. This chemical cocktail has a specific signature that reflects the emotions you are experiencing in that moment. And as you know, emotions are the products of experience. A new experience creates a new emotion, which signals new genes in new ways. So, thus, emotions signal the body to record the event chemically, and you begin to embody what you're learning. So, in the process, the limbic brain assists in forming long term memories. You can remember any experience better because you can recall how you felt emotionally while the event was occurring. The neocortex and limbic brain together enable the neocortex and the limbic brain together enable us to form declarative memories, meaning that we can declare what we've learned or experienced. Now see figure 6b for more information on declarative and non-declarative memories. So I'm going to pause right here because if you have an experience where you don't have much of an emotional variance and you're kind of just neutral through the whole thing, what this is telling us is that that becomes a non-declarative experience because there is nothing that is going to stand out in your mammalian brain, in your emotional limbic brain, because it's kind of a neutral experience. That's why if you have, for example, if you experience a traumatic event such as a car accident or a divorce or a bad breakup, that event created an elevated traumatic response where there was either an elevated emotion of grief, of anger, of sadness, of sorrow, of whatever the elevated emotion was. It took you from your normal baseline to all of a sudden you had an elevated negative emotion. And by sheer fact that you had that elevated emotion, it categorizes it as a declarative memory in your brain, and you're able to remember the details of that event with much more clarity than a non-declarative event, which you were pretty neutral throughout the whole experience. So there wasn't really anything to stand out in your mind to create either a low level response like anger and frustration or joy and exuberant excitement and happiness. So you have to be on one side or the other for it to cement the details so that you can recall it with more clarity. So moving on here, you can see then how we are marked emotionally by highly charged experiences, All people who have been married can tell you where they were and what they were doing when they or their beloved proposed. Perhaps they were eating a great meal on the patio of their favorite restaurant, feeling the balmy breezes of that summer night and enjoying the sunset while the strains of Mozart played softly in the background, when their dinner partner got down on one knee and held out a little black box. Oh my gosh, that's actually pretty close to what happened to me with my marriage. That's pretty funny. So the combination of everything they were experiencing in that moment made them feel very different from their normal self. The typical internal chemical balance that their identity self had memorized got knocked out of the order. Yeah, got knocked out of order by what they saw, heard, and felt. In a sense, they woke up from the familiar, routine environmental stimuli that typically bombarded the brain and causes us to think and feel in predictable ways. Novel events surprise us to the point that we become more aware in the present moment. If the limbic brain had a motto, it might be experience is for the body. So if knowledge is for the mind and experience is for the body, then when you apply knowledge and create a new experience, you teach the body what the mind has intellectually learned. Knowledge without experience is merely philosophy. Experience without knowledge is ignorance. There's a progression that has to take place. You have to take knowledge and live it and embrace it emotionally. Okay, just a little sidebar here. That is why I am so passionate about reading, reviewing, and applying the teachings that Dr. Joe has in his book. And I keep on repeating, you're going to hear me say this over and over again throughout these broadcasts, that it's so imperative for you to buy the book, it's not good enough for you to just have the Kindle version of it. I really highly recommend that you have the paperback version. For example, over here, let's see, how do I point? Back there, you see Becoming Supernatural. It's important to have the paperback and have the Kindle. And the reason why is you've got the tactile experience. Again, remember, there's 8 sensory systems of the body. There's the 5, which are obvious to most people, and then those of us who are more involved in this type of study and application and healing arts. There's visual, olfactory, gustatory, auditory, tactile, kinesthetic, and then you have nociceptive, proprioceptive, and interoceptive systems, which is how your brain actually fires and wires and categorizes and places in different compartments of your brain, depending on proprioceptor has to do with when you experienced something, where it was physically located relative to you. So without getting into all these different systems, but all these things are at play. So the bottom line is, by your having the physical book and then having either the Kindle or iPad version too, then you're able to do both. And I'm just telling you what I did, because once I read the book the first time, I remember, I think I had started off, I had the paperback, and then I think I was in chapter 2 or 3, and then I immediately realized, wait a minute, I really need to learn this information like super well. This is like critically important information. This is like a college textbook as far as I was concerned. And I really wanted to know it, not just memorize and recall the information, but to really embody it and know it and apply it. So I knew that in order to do that, I was going to have to not just highlight the paper book, but also then use the Kindle version to also listen to the audiobook and then highlight in that as well. And so now I'm hearing the audiobook, I'm reading the book, I'm handling the book. The way my brain works, it's been that way since I was a kid. I actually see the pages of the book where I can read it in my memory, and I can go, oh yeah, I remember on 276, that's chapter 13, or chapter 12 on the pineal gland, for example, because I go, oh yeah, I see it's chapter 12, chapter 12, the pineal gland, for example, for becoming supernatural. So it's going to help me retain this knowledge so that I can apply it better. And so that is my wish and my desire for you, so that you can actually be empowered to heal and to create what it is that you want. Moving on. Knowledge without experience is merely philosophy. Experience without knowledge is ignorance. There's a progression that has to take place. You have to take knowledge and live it, embrace it emotionally. If you're still with me as I've been discussing how to change your life, you've learned about gaining knowledge and then taking action to have a new experience, which produces a new feeling. Next, you have to memorize that feeling and move what you've learned from your conscious mind to the subconscious mind. You've already got the hardware to do that in the third brain area that we're going to discuss. So from thinking and doing to being, the cerebellum stores habitual thoughts, attitudes, and behaviors. So do you remember my talking about common experience when we can't consciously remember a phone number, ATM, PIN, or lock combination, but we've practiced it so often that the body knows better than the brain and our fingers automatically get the job done? That may seem like a small thing, but when the body knows equal to or better than the conscious mind, when you can repeat an experience at all without much conscious effort, then you have memorized the action, behavior, or attitude, or emotional reaction until it has become a skill or a habit. When you reach this level of ability, you have moved into a state of being. In the process, you've activated the third brain area that plays a major role in changing your life, the cerebellum, which is the seat of the subconscious. So the most active part of the brain, the cerebellum, the most active part of the brain, the cerebellum, is located at the back of the skull. Think of it as the brain's microprocessor and memory center. Every neuron in the cerebellum has the potential to connect with at least 200,000 and up to 1,000,000 other cells to process, balance, coordination, awareness of the spatial relation of the body parts, and execution of controlled movements. The cerebellum stores certain types of simple actions and skills along with hardwired attitudes, emotional reactions, repeated actions, habits, conditioned behaviors, and unconscious reflexes and skills that we have mastered and memorized. Possessing amazing memory storage, it easily downloads various forms of learned information into programmed states of the mind and body. When you are in a state of being, you begin to memorize a new neurochemical self. That's when the cerebellum takes over, making that new state an implicit part of your subconscious programming. And the cerebellum is the site of non-declarative memories, meaning that you've done or practiced something so many times that it becomes second nature and you don't have to think about it. It's become so automatic that it's hard to declare or describe how you do it. Pause right here. If any of you have ever learned how to drive a stick shift car, as you know, when you first are learning to drive a stick shift car, you really have to think about first, second, third, fourth, fifth, and then reverse. You actually have to be very aware of where it is. And then you have to, the feeling of how the gears move into first and second, and you don't want to grind the gears and things like that. But as you continuously practice, and you're practicing putting in the clutch and then first and release and that whole thing, instead of you having to think conscientiously of putting the clutch in, of moving into first, releasing the clutch, etc., and figuring out that rhythm, eventually over time, you don't have to think about it anymore. You just turn on the car and you automatically do it, and you're not even thinking about. You could be thinking about anything else. You could be thinking about where you're going. You could be thinking about listening to your GPS, getting to a new place. but you're not really thinking so much about the action of the clutch and the gears and all of that. You're now kind of on autopilot, and now your focus is on managing the road and paying attention to the directions to where you've got to go. And this is no different. This is the same thing. As you become more adept of these practices and you start to do more meditations, and you no longer have to think so much about moving the energy and bringing your attention, because you're going to automatically bring your attention to your first energy center, up to the second, to the third, to the fourth, to the fifth, and so forth. And doing that breathing where you're contracting the muscles from the base of your spine, moving all the way up so that your spinal fluid is moving all the way up from the base of your spine all the way to the top of your head. You hold it and then release it and come back down. That will become second nature too. But like anything else, it just requires practice. And the more you practice it, the more effortless it becomes. And then you'll find that as you practice it throughout other parts of the day, just doing the breath, you will do that because you have an altered state of being that benefits you. The fact that you're exercising that breath and you're bringing that oxygen in, you're alkalizing your body, you're bringing the cycles of your, the spinal fluid that's inside your spinal column, instead of it rotating just twice every 24 hours, now it's who knows how many dozens of times between your meditation. And if you do 10 breaths during the middle of the day for no reason other than because it's benefiting you, that's 10 more cycles that your cerebrospinal fluid is moving, which is only going to benefit and keep your brain more alert. Not only that, there's so many other benefits to that, but the bottom line is that you're doing these different practices that will only make you a better you. It'll make you a healthier you. Okay? When that happens, you will arrive at a point when happiness, or whatever attitude, behavior, skill, or trait you've been focusing on and rehearsing mentally or physically, will become an innately memorized program of the new self. Did you hear that? I'm going to read that again. When that happens, you will arrive at a point when happiness, or whatever attitude, behavior, skill, or trait you've been focusing on and rehearsing mentally or physically, will become an innately memorized program of the new self. Now, I have to tell you, my personal experience was when I first started doing doctors, I used to just do meditations primarily in the evenings before I went into Dr. Joe's work. And I would, of course, pray in the morning and other times of the day and have my conversations with the divine throughout different portions of the day. But when I started with Dr. Joe's meditations, which was in March of 2019, it was just a little over a year ago, I started doing the meditations religiously every morning and every night, bookends. Start off my day that way. First thing when I woke up, I would sit up in my bed, grab the meditations that I had downloaded onto my phone, and then I would turn it on. And the same thing I would do at night. And over, how many months? March, April, May, June, July, August, I want to say September, October. So in the 7th or 8th month of my constantly doing this every morning and every night, and of course, 3 or 4 months after, it was in March that I started, and in June I went to the monastery. I was there for 7 days in Cancun. And what I noticed by the 7th or 8th month was sometimes I would have these profound like bursts of joy and of happiness. And there was nothing in particular that was going on in my life that was, worthy of my being in that state, but I was. And I remember being, because I lived in Sicily for the last half of the year. And I remember several times, I remember the first time it happened when I was in Sicily. It was a day that I wasn't planning on touring or sightseeing or doing any kind of exploring. I was just going to stay in my apartment, beautiful apartment, but beautiful apartment, beautiful terrain, everything around it was beautiful. But I didn't have any plans of anything. And I remember going out to my balcony and just sitting out there, and all of a sudden this just joyous happiness. I was just like, I mean, normally I would feel like that if I had something like really extraordinary planned, or if I, but I didn't have anything planned that day. It was just a regular day. And my heart was just like beaming with this joy and happiness for no reason. And I realized, oh my gosh, it's the meditations. That's what I've read that people have been talking about. I've heard of other people talk about this, and now it would happen to me. And I thought, this is so cool. This is a byproduct, a benefit from doing the meditations. So not only was I experiencing peace and all that, but I just had this like bubbling of joy and happiness. And it's like you're walking on cloud nine. And I thought, how cool is that? And in that state, you want everybody to experience that, because it's such a joyous place of being. It really is an unconditional love. You're in an unconditional place of love, love of self, love of life, love of where you are, how you're being, for no reason other than because you're alive. That's it. And so that is a pretty cool place to be. Now, I'm not in that state every single day. It's not, I'm in a pretty good state every day, but every now and then I have those days where they're like just supercharged for no reason. And I know for a fact that it has to do with that meditative practice. So I hope that encourages you if you've been like not being so good about doing the meditations every day. I would say just, you know what, the next 21 days, you do something for 21 days in a row, it becomes a habit. So just decide, you know what, I'm going to do this because this is the greatest gift that I can give myself. And I'm opening the door to an infinite amount of possibilities for myself in every capacity: my health, my wealth, my relationships, my friendships, just everything, my work, my passion, my purpose, just how I exist on the planet. This is like the greatest treasure chest that you could ever imagine. And so why not give yourself that? Does that make sense? Alrighty, so when that happens, you will arrive at a point when happiness, or whatever attitude, behavior, skill, or trait you've been focusing on and rehearsing mentally or physically, will become an innately memorized program of the new self. Let's use a true to life example to take a practical look at how these three brains take us from thinking to doing to being. So first we'll see how through conscious mental rehearsal, the thinking brain, or the neocortex, uses knowledge to activate new circuits in new ways to make a new mind. Then our thought creates an experience, and via the emotional limbic brain, that produces a new emotion. So our thinking and feeling brains condition the body to a new mind. Finally, if we reach the point where mind and body are working as one, the cerebellum enables us to memorize a new neurochemical self. And our new state of being is now an innate program in our subconscious. A real life example of three brains in action. As a practical look into these ideas, suppose that you recently read a few thought-provoking books about compassion, including one written by the Dalai Lama, a biography of Mother Teresa, and an account of the work of St. Francis de Assisi. This knowledge allowed you to think outside of the box. Reading this material would have forged new synaptic connections in the thinking brain. Essentially, you learned about the philosophy of compassion through other people's experiences, not yours. Moreover, you've sustained those neural connections by reviewing what you've learned on a daily basis. You're so enthusiastic that you're solving all of your friends' problems by offering advice and holding court. You have become the great philosopher. Intellectually, you know your stuff. As you're driving home from work, your spouse calls to say that you've been invited to dinner with your mother in law in 3 days. You pull off the road, and already you're thinking about how you have disliked your MIL intensely. Oh, your mother in law, intensely ever since she hurt your feelings 10 years ago. Soon you got a mental laundry list. You never liked her opinionated way of talking. Now she interrupts others, how she smells, even how she cooks. Whenever you're around her, your heart races, your jaw tightens, your face and body are tense, you feel jittery, and you just want to jump up and down and leave. Still sitting in your car, you remember that those books on the philosophy of compassion, and you think about what you learned theoretically. It occurs to you, maybe if I try to apply what I read in those books, I might have a new experience of my mother in law. What did I learn that I can personalize to change the outcome of this dinner? So when you contemplate applying that understanding with your mother in law, something wonderful begins to happen. You decide not to react to her with your typical set of automatic reactions and programs. Instead, you begin to think about who you no longer want to be and who you want to be instead. You ask yourself, how do I not want to feel? And how am I not going to act when I see her? Your frontal lobe begins to cool off, and the neural circuits that are connected to the old you, you're starting to unwire or prune away that old you from functioning as an identity. You could say that because your brain isn't firing in the same way, you're no longer creating the same mind. So then you review what those books said to help you plan how you want to think, feel, and act towards your mother in law. You ask yourself, now, how can I modify my behavior, my actions, and my reactions so my new experience leads to a new feeling? So you picture yourself greeting and hugging her, asking her questions about things you know she is interested in, and complimenting her on her new hairdo or glasses. Over the next few days, as you mentally rehearse your new ideal of yourself, you continue to install more neurological hardware so you'll have the proper circuits in place. In effect, a new software program when you actually interact with your mother in law. So, for most of us to go from thinking to doing is like inspiring snails to pick up the pace. We want to stay in the intellectual, philosophical realm of our reality. We like to identify with the memorized, recognizable feeling of the familiar self. Instead, by surrendering old thought patterns, interrupting habitual emotional reactions, and foregoing knee-jerk behaviors, then planning and rehearsing new ways of being, you are putting yourself into the equation of that knowledge you learned and beginning to create a new mind. You are reminding yourself who you want to be. But there is another step that we must address here. What happened as you began to observe your old personality self related to the familiar thoughts, habitual behaviors, and the memorized emotions that you previously connected with your mother-in-law? In a way, you were going into the operating system of the subconscious mind where those programs exist, and you were the observer of those programs. When you can become aware or notice who you are being, you're becoming conscious of your unconscious self. As you begin to psychologically project yourself into a potential situation ahead of the actual experience, the impending dinner, you began to rewire your neural circuitry to look as though the event being compassionate towards your mother-in-law had already taken place. Once those neural networks began to fire in unison, your brain created a picture, vision, model, or what I will call a hologram, a multi-dimensional image representing the ideal self that you were focused on being. The instant this happened, you made what you were thinking about more real than anything else. Your brain captured the thought as an experience and upscaled its gray matter to look as though the experience had already occurred. Embodying knowledge through experience, teaching the body what the mind has learned. So soon it's game time, and you find yourself sitting at dinner face to face with good old mom. Instead of knee jerking when her typical behaviors manifest, you stay conscious. Remember what you learned and decide to try it out. Rather than judging, attacking, or feeling animosity toward her, you do something completely different. Like the book's encouraged, you stay in the present moment, you open up your heart and really listen to what she's saying. You no longer hold her to her past. Lo and behold, you modify your behavior and restrain your impulsive emotional reactions, thereby creating a new experience with your mother-in-law. That activates the limbic brain to cook up a new blend of chemicals, which generates a new emotion. And all of a sudden, you truly start to feel compassion for her. You see her for who she is. You even see aspects of yourself in her. Your muscles relax. You feel your heart opening, and you breathe deeply and freely. You had such a great feeling that day that it lingers. Now you're inspired and open-minded. And you find that you truly love your mother-in-law as you couple your new internal feeling of goodwill and love with this person in your external reality. You connect compassion with your mother-in-law. You form an associative memory. Once you begin to feel the emotion of compassion, in a sense, you chemically instructed your body what your mind philosophically knew, and that activated and modified some of your genes. Now you've gone from thinking to doing. Your behaviors match your conscious intentions, and your actions are equal to your thought. Mind and body are aligned and working together. You did exactly what those people did in those books. So by intellectually learning compassion with your brain and your mind, then demonstrating this ideal in your environment through experience, you embodied this elevated feeling. You just conditioned your body to a new mind of compassion. Your mind and body were working together. You embodied compassion. And in a sense, the word has become flesh. Two brains have taken you from thinking to doing, but can you create a state of being? From your efforts to embody compassion, you now have your neocortex and limbic brain working together. You're out of the box of the familiar, habitual, memorized self, which operates within a set of automatic programs. And you're in a new thinking and feeling cycle. You have experienced how compassion feels, and you like it better than covert hostility, rejection, and suppressed anger. So hold on, though. You are not yet ready for sainthood. It's not enough to have a mind and a body working together one time. That got you from thinking to doing. But can you reproduce that feeling of compassion at will? Can you repeatedly embody compassion independent of conditions in your environment so that no person or situation could ever create that old state of being in you again? If not, you haven't mastered compassion. My definition of mastery is that our internal chemical state is greater than anything in our external world. You are a master when you've conditioned yourself with chosen thoughts and feelings you've memorized and desired emotional chemical states, and nothing in your external life deters you from your aims. So no person, no thing, no experience at any time or any place should disrupt your internal chemical coherence. You can think, act, and feel differently whenever you choose. So if you can master suffering, you can just as easily master joy. You probably know somebody who has mastered suffering, right? So you call her and ask, "How are you?" So, listen, I'm going to go out with some friends to a new art gallery and then eat at this restaurant that has really healthy desserts. Afterwards, we're going to listen to some live music. Would you like to come with us? No, I don't feel like it. But if she said what she actually meant, she'd say, "I've memorized this emotional state, and nothing in my environment, no person, no experience, no condition, no thing is going to move me from my internal chemical state of suffering. It feels better to be in pain than to let go and be happy. I am enjoying my addiction for now, and all of these things that you want to do might distract me from my emotional dependency." Oh my gosh. I actually know a few people who are like this, that they like to be cloistered in a cave in their room, away from everything, everybody, all the time. And this is something that has lasted for years and years and years and years. And it's like, oh my gosh, it's the way this is described here. Obviously, Dr. Joe is making it very clear that this is a form of not just emotional dependency, but that it's an addiction to a cocktail of chemicals that are bathing your brain, which, as we know from scientific studies, your emotional state only lasts 90 seconds. If you all of a sudden have anger, anything beyond 90 seconds, you're faking it. You're forcing and conditioning your body and your brain to repeat that feedback loop of 90 seconds over and over and over again. And so if you're doing that for minutes, hours, days, weeks, months, years, it's you that's creating that, because chemically you only had that in your bloodstream for 90 seconds and then it disappears. Think that for a moment. So, but guess what? We can just as easily master an internal chemical state such as joy or compassion. In the preceding example with your mother-in-law, if you practiced your thoughts, behaviors, and feelings enough times, being compassionate would become rather natural. You would evolve from just thinking about it to doing something about it to being it. Being means that it's easy, natural, second nature, routine, and unconscious. Compassion and love would be as automatic and familiar to you as those self-limiting emotions you just changed. So now you need to replicate this experience of thinking, feeling, and acting out of compassion. If you do, you will break the addiction of your past emotional state and neurochemically condition your body and mind to memorize the internal chemical state called compassion better than your conscious mind. Ultimately, if you repeatedly recreate the experience of compassion at will, practicing it independent of any circumstance in your life, your body would become the mind of compassion. You would memorize compassion so well that nothing from your outside world could move you from this state of being. Now, all three brains are working together, and you are biologically, neurochemically, and genetically in a state of compassion. When compassion becomes unconditionally ordinary and familiar to you, you have progressed from knowledge to experience to wisdom. How appropriate that this section would end on the word wisdom. One of the things that I had a realization several years ago, and as many of you know, I love words. I'm a bit of a wordsmith, and I really have felt for years and years, for many, many years, that there is a lot of power in words. And we know from both scientific as well as mystic teachings that not only is a certain energy released when you speak words, when you think words, or write words, but every word has a vibrational frequency to it. With that being said, I remember in one of my meditations several years back where it was revealed to me that the word wisdom, that at the heart of it was wisdom is the wise dominion of a certain concept, of a certain experience, of a certain lesson, of a certain thing. And I thought, wow, when I had this revelation, wisdom is wise dominion. You actually wisely dominate a certain lesson. I never thought of it that way. It's like, that is pretty cool. And ever since that moment, every time I see, hear, read the word wisdom, I think about wise dominion. And so I'm sharing it with you because there's probably one person who's watching this right now who this is not only going to resonate with you, but it's going to put your perspective in a different plane, if you will. And you're going to have a different level of understanding as to exactly really what wisdom is, which is the wise dominion of an experience or of a lesson learned. Yeah. So I that was very profound for me when I had that revelation. And so I hope that helps you. And if it does, I would love for you to write in the comments, when I shared this with you about wise dominion being wisdom, what did you feel? What did you sense? Was there something in your brain that clicked? Did you have a light bulb moment? Did you have an aha? I'm curious to see what kind of feedback from your perspective now that you're hearing this for the first time. So if you put some comments below, I'd really like to have a conversation with you about that. Progressing to a state of being. The role of our two memory systems. We have three brains that allow us to evolve from thinking to doing to being. Take a look at this chart, figure 6b1, declarative and non-declarative memories. There are two memory systems in the brain. The first system is called declarative or explicit memories. When we remember and declare what we have learned or experienced, those are declarative memories. And there are two types of declarative memories. Knowledge, semantic memories derived from philosophical knowledge, and experience, episodic memories derived from sensory experiences, identified as events in our lives with particular people, animals, or objects while we were doing or witnessing a certain thing at a particular time and place. Episodic memories tend to imprint longer in the brain and body than semantic memories. So the second memory system is called non-declarative or implicit memories. When we practice something so many times that it becomes second nature, we no longer have to think about it. It's like we almost can't declare how we do it. The body and mind are one. This is the seat of our skills, habits, automatic behaviors, associative memories, unconscious attitudes, and emotional reactions. So in figure 6b2, three brains, thinking to doing to being. When we take what we learned intellectually, neocortex, and apply it, personalize it, or demonstrate it, we will modify our behavior in some sort of way. So when we do, we will create a new experience, which will produce a new emotion, limbic brain. And if we can repeat, replicate, or experience that action at will, we will move into a state of being, cerebellum. Wisdom is accumulated knowledge that has been gained through repeated experience. And when being compassionate is as natural as suffering, judging, blaming, or being frustrated, negative, or insecure, now we are wise. We are liberated to seize new opportunities because somehow life seems to organize itself equal to how or who we are being. Figure 6C, this chart shows the progression of how the three brains align to correlate different avenues of personal evolution. So going from thinking straight to being, a prelude to meditation. So going from thinking to doing to being is a progression that we've all experienced many times, whether it has been when we learned to be a driver, a skier, a knitter, a person to whom speaking a second language has become second nature, and so forth. So now let's talk about one of evolution's great gifts to us as humans, the ability to go from thinking to being without taking any physical action. Said another way, we can create a new state of being ahead of having an actual experience. So we do this all the time, and it's not a case of fake it till you make it. So for example, you may have a sexual fantasy in which you inwardly experience all the thoughts, feelings, and actions you look forward to when your partner returns from a trip. You're so present with your internal experience that your body is chemically altered and responds as if the future event is already upon you in that exact moment. You have moved into a new state of being. Similarly, whether you're mentally rehearsing the speech you're going to give, reminding yourself how you're going to handle the confrontation that you need to have with your coworker, or imagining what you want to eat when you're really hungry but stuck in traffic, and in each case, you're thinking about that to the exclusion of everything else. Your body will begin to move into a state of being just by thought alone. So we're going to read that again, because I think there's a lot of clues in here too. So we do this all the time, and it's not a case of fake it till you make it. So for example, you have a sexual fantasy in which you inwardly experience all the thoughts, feelings, and actions you look forward to when your partner returns from a trip. You're so present with your internal experience that your body is chemically altered and responds as if that future event is already upon you in that exact moment. You have moved into a new state of being. Similarly, whether you're mentally rehearsing the speech you're going to give, reminding yourself how you're going to handle the confrontation that you need to have with your coworker, or imagine what you want to eat when you're really hungry but stuck in traffic, and in each case, you're thinking about that to the exclusion of everything else. Your body will begin to move into a state of being just by thought alone. Okay, but how far can you take this? Through thinking and feeling alone, can you finally be the person you want to be? Can you create and live a chosen reality as my daughter did when she experienced the summer job of her dreams? That's where meditation comes in. People use meditative techniques for a lot of reasons, as you know. In this book, you will learn a special meditation designed for a specific purpose to help you overcome the habit of being yourself and become that ideal self you desire. Through the remainder of this chapter, we'll connect some of the knowledge we've covered up to now with the meditation you will soon learn. Whenever I discuss meditation or the meditative process, I will be referring to the process that will be our focus in part 3. Meditation allows us to change our brains, bodies, and state of being. Most important, we can make these changes without having to take any physical action or have any interaction with the external environment. Through meditation, we can install the necessary neurological hardware, just as those piano players and finger exercisers made changes through mental rehearsal. Those research subjects use mental rehearsal alone, but for our purposes, it is one component of the meditative process, albeit a very important one. If I asked you to think about the qualities that your ideal self would possess, or if I suggested that you contemplate what it would feel like to be a person of greatness such as Mother Teresa or Nelson Mandela, then just by contemplating a new way of being, you would begin firing your brain in new ways and making a new mind. That's mental rehearsal in action. I'm now asking you to reflect on what it would feel like to be happy, content, satisfied, and at peace. What would you envision for yourself if you were to create a new ideal you? Essentially, the meditative process allows you to answer this question by bringing together all of the information learned and wired synaptically into your brain about what it means to be happy, content, satisfied, and at peace. In meditation, you take that knowledge and then place yourself in the equation. Instead of merely asking what it would mean to be happy, you put yourself in the position of practicing and thus living in a state of happiness. After all, you know what happiness looks and feels like. You've had past experiences with it yourself. You've seen other people's versions of it. Now you get to pick and choose from that knowledge and experience to create a new ideal of yourself. I've talked about how through the frontal lobe, you activate new circuits in new ways to create a new mind. Once you experience that new mind, your brain creates a kind of holographic image that gives you a model to follow in creating your future reality. Because you have installed new neural circuits ahead of any real experience, you don't have to carry out a nonviolent revolution as Gandhi did. You don't have to lead your people and be burned at the stakes like Joan of Arc was. You simply have to use your knowledge and experience of those qualities of courage and conviction to produce an emotional effect within you. The result will be a state of mind. By repeatedly producing that state of mind, it will become familiar to you and you will be wiring new circuits. The more often you produce that state of mind, the more those thoughts will become the experience. Once that thought experience transformation takes place, the end product of that experience will be a feeling, an emotion. When this occurs, your body, as the unconscious mind, does not know the difference between an event that takes place in the physical reality and the emotions you created by thought alone. As someone who is conditioning the body to a new mind, you'll find that your thinking brain and emotional brain are now working in concert. Remember that thoughts are for the brain and feelings are for the body. When you are both thinking and feeling in a specific way as a part of the meditative process, you are different from when you started out. The newly installed circuits, the neurological and chemical changes that have been produced by those thoughts and emotions have altered you in such a way that there is a physical evidence in the brain and the body that shows those changes. At that point, you've moved into a state of being. You're no longer just practicing happiness or gratitude or whatever. You are being grateful or happy. You can produce that state of mind and body every day. You can continuously experience and re-experience an event and produce the emotional response to that experience of how you would feel if you were that new ideal self. So if you can get up from your meditative session and be in that new state of being, altered neurologically, biologically, and chemically, and genetically, you have activated those changes ahead of any experience, and you will be more prone to acting and thinking in ways equal to who you are being. You have broken the habit of being yourself. Figure 6D. You can go from thinking to being without having to do anything. If you are mentally rehearsing a new mind, there will come a moment that the thought you are thinking about will become the experience. When this occurs, the end product of that inward experience is an emotion or a feeling. Once you can feel what it would feel like to be that person, your body, as the unconscious mind begins to believe it is in that reality. And now your mind and body are beginning to work as one, and you are being that person without having to do anything yet. As you move into that state of being by thought alone, you will be more prone to do things and think things that are equal to how you are actually being. And as a reminder, when you are in a new state of being, a new personality, you also create a new personal reality. A new state of being creates a new personal reality, and a new personal reality produces a new personal reality. So how will you know whether this meditative practice has activated your three brains to produce the intended effect? Simple. You will feel different as a result of investing in the process. If you feel exactly as you did before, if the same catalysts produce the same reactions in you, then nothing has happened in the quantum field. Your same thoughts and feelings are reproducing the same electromagnetic signal in the field. And you haven't changed chemically, neurologically, genetically, or in any other way for that matter. And if you eventually get up after your meditative process and your meditation sessions and feel differently from when you began them, and if you can maintain that modified state of mind and body, then you have changed. What you've changed inside of you, the new state of being that you created, should now produce an effect outside of you. You've moved beyond the cause and effect model of the universe, that old Newtonian concept of something external, to your controlling your thoughts, actions, and emotions. I'll return to this point in a bit. You will also know that your meditation has been fruitful if something unexpected and new shows up in your life as a result of your efforts. Remember, the quantum model tells us that if you have created a new mind and a new state of being, you have an altered electromagnetic signature because you are thinking and feeling differently. You are changing reality. So together, thoughts and feelings can do this. Separately, they cannot. Let me remind you again, you can't think one way and feel another. So you can't think one way and feel another and expect anything in your life to change. The combination of your thoughts and feelings is your state of being. Change your state of being and you change your reality. Here's where coherence signals really come into play. If you can send into the quantum field a signal coherent in thought and feeling, the state of being, independent of the external world, then something different will show up in your life. When it does, you'll no doubt experience a powerful emotional response, which will inspire you to create a new reality once again, and you can use that emotion to generate an even more wonderful experience. So let me get back to Newton. We are all conditioned by the Newtonian notion that life is in fact dominated by cause and effect. When something good happens to us, we express gratitude or joy. So we go through life waiting for someone or something outside ourselves to regulate our feelings. Instead, I'm asking you to take control and to invert the process rather than waiting for an occasion to cause you to feel a certain way. Create the feeling ahead of any experience in the physical realm. Convince your body emotionally that a gratitude generating experience has already taken place. To do this, you can pick a potential in the quantum field and get in touch with how it would feel if you were experiencing it. I'm asking you to use thought and feeling to put yourself in the shoes of that future self, that possibly you so vividly that you begin emotionally condition your body to believe that you are that person now. When you open your eyes after your meditative session, who do you want to be? What would it feel like to be this ideal self? or to have this desired experience. To fully break the habit of being yourself, say goodbye to cause and effect and embrace the quantum model of reality. Choose a potential reality that you want. Live it in your thoughts and your feelings, and give thanks ahead of the actual event. Can you accept the notion that once you change your internal state, you don't need the external world to provide you with a reason to feel joy, gratitude, appreciation, or any other elevated emotion? When your body experiences that, the event is occurring in that moment and it feels real to you, based solely on what you're focused on mentally and are feeling emotionally, then you are experiencing the future right now. The moment you are in that state of being, in that now moment, and present in that experience, that's when you are connected to all possible realities that exist in the quantum field. Remember that if you are in the past or in the future, based on your familiar emotions or anticipation of some effect, you don't have access to all possibilities the quantum field holds. The only way to access the quantum field is by being in the now. Keep in mind that this cannot be just an intellectual process either. Thoughts and feelings must be coherent. In other words, this meditation requires that you drop down about 10 inches from your head to your heart. Open your heart. Open your heart. And think about how it would feel if you embodied a combination of all the traits that you admire and that make up your ideal self. You may object that you can't know how it would feel because you've never experienced what it is like to have those traits and to be the ideal self. My response is that your body can experience this before you have any physical evidence, ahead of your senses. If a future desire that you've never experienced actually does manifest in your life, you'd have to agree that you would experience an elevated emotion such as joy, excitement, or gratitude. So those emotions are what you can naturally focus on instead of being enslaved to emotions that are only the residue of the past. You are now using elevated emotions to create the future. So the elevated emotions of gratitude, love, and so forth all have a higher frequency that will help you move into a state of being where you can feel as though the desired events have actually occurred. If you are in a state of greatness, then the signal you send into the quantum field is that the events have happened already and they've come to pass. Giving thanks allows you to emotionally condition your body to believe that what it is producing your gratitude has already happened. By activating and coordinating these three brains. So by activating and coordinating your three brains, meditation allows you to move from thinking to being. And once you are in a new state of being, you are more prone to act and think equal to who you are being. Perhaps you've wondered why it may be hard to move into a state of gratitude or to give thanks ahead of an actual experience. Is it possible that you've been living by a memorized emotion that has become so much part of your identity on a subconscious level that now you cannot feel any other way than you're accustomed to? If so, maybe your identity has become a matter of how you appear to the world on the outside to distract you and change you how you feel on the inside. In the next chapter, we're going to examine how to close that gap and bring about true liberation, when you can readily feel gratitude or joy or fall in love with the future without needing any person, thing, or experience to cause you to feel that way. Then these elevated emotions will be available to fuel your creations. So I think it's important to notice that it's those elevated emotions that fuel your manifestation and the things that you're going to create. So if you just have the thought and you don't add the elevated emotion, it doesn't work. You in fact have to have the thought and an elevated emotion of love, joy, gratitude, and appreciation, because gratitude and appreciation are the ultimate state of receivership. It's what signals the brain that it has already happened. That's why you're grateful. You're grateful because you already have it. You've already received it. So that is a form, in my opinion, it's a form of a brain biohack. That finishes our chapter 7 read and review. Thank you for tuning in, tapping in, and turning on to Money, Love and Money Secrets TV. And it has been a pleasure and a joy. I hope that you use the comments below as an open classroom forum where you can ask whatever questions you want. And if you're interested in joining us on any of these Zoom sessions, check the description below. It gives you information on how to do that. And I look forward to seeing you for chapter 7. Ciao for now.